Hello and welcome to another retrospective episode of the Nothing Ventured podcast. In today's episode, we're going to look at some of the VCs and operators impacting tech and venture in Africa. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I was born in Kenya and have deep roots in the community in Mombasa and Nairobi. I still have lots of family there and travel there relatively frequently. And I've always been incredibly optimistic about the future of tech in Africa because often they're solving real problems for people on the ground. So in today's episode, we're going to hear from some absolutely incredible VCs and operators who have touched Africa in profound ways. We're going to hear from Eghosa Omoigui, general partner at Echo VC, David Fogel, who was previously COO and CCO of WeFarm, and Toyosi Ogedengbe, who's currently a VC at Extension, but goes by the Twitter handle, the Black VC, with strong angel ties to the African ecosystem. I really hope you enjoy this episode and keep supporting us as we grow.
Interesting that you bring up WeFarm. We looked at that deal a few times. We passed every time.
Got it.
And one of the key gating items for us was that we didn't believe that the company had enough of a high resolution understanding of the market they were trying to serve.
Got it. They didn't have the deep understanding of.
I mean, it is an innate understanding, right? It's not just it's
a lived understanding, I guess, right?
It really is, So when we and the people, founders come and they're telling us things, and they really want to know, okay, what is it that you understand? And I'm like, look, you want to go serve farmers in Africa, right? And I say, let me tell you a story, right, about one of our portfolio companies that was providing distributing subsidies to farmers. And one of the things they would do would be to do KYC, right? And so they would bring these farmers in to do biometrics. And for a lot of these farmers that are not mechanized, don't rely on mechanized agricultural inputs and the like, a lot of it's physical, it's hand to hand. And so a bunch of them end up not having fingerprints. And so, story shows up, farmer comes in, doesn't have, enough discernible fingerprints. And they say, we need fingerprints. So he goes back and brings his son and says, okay, use his fingerprints. Right. And, and I'm like, so when I'm sitting down in London or in New York and explaining to you how this works, I know you got some fancy PowerPoint slides and some McKinsey data, and I get that, right? But the high resolution understanding of the market you're trying to serve is critical. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a member of that demographic, but you have to have, I think, demographic empathy, right, and understanding. And so it's, when we talk about these underserved markets, it's not necessarily that we're necessarily saying these are lived experiences for us, but we're not enough people, and we've been, I think, empathetic enough to truly understand. So don't come in there and just impose your own view of it. But what does this world look like, and how are the behaviors manifesting themselves? And those are things that, the rational mind the rational mind can easily dismiss because it just doesn't make sense to you. Why would they do X or Y? That's not the point. The point is that they do X and Y.
Well, and this is, I mean, like the example that I always give is, whilst here in the UK or in the US for that matter, we sit here, we complain about whether our internet online banking works, right? And we're worried about how that website looks and whether the flow works. On the other hand, in Africa, you have people literally sending money via SMS, right? Like, but you would need to understand why, right, that was required at that point
Correct.
in time in that market. And the reason is very simple. You know, people don't have or didn't have smartphones. I think, you know, there's 50% penetration now, but, you know, back in those days, probably 10%, 12% or whatever. But people did have, you know, the Nokias and you know, the SMS technology, right? But yeah, I guess it's that question of how well do you understand that market? And there are some markets, you know, I know having lived in Papua New Guinea, for example, if you've never lived there, there is no way you will understand like what a cocoa grower in the highlands goes through, right? To get their product to market and how that works.
And there's a construct we built internally for investing in these underserved markets, sort of a requirement for how we, you know, the things we push founders to think through. And this one is we call it the ZCL, for zero cognitive load. And so it's critical to build products and services that are zero cognitive load, right? And an example of zero cognitive load product is certainly WhatsApp. But the prior example was M-Pesa, right?
Yeah.
And I like to say, you know, what is the most interesting feature of M-Pesa that allows it to be like water? It'll flow anywhere, right? And people are like, oh, because it's mobile. No. Because you don't need to know how to read or write English.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any assumptions. But even the trader on the side of the road knows how to count 0 to 9.
Yep.
That is the bottom line, right? Because at the end of the day, they understand the concept of money.
Yep.
Right? So when you're using, you know, not alphanumerals, but just numerals to sort of transmit, receive money, that is a zero cognitive load product. And I tell folks, it's not fancy, but it gets the job done. You know, and when you now start thinking of M-Pesa instead of what was it? It was 60, 70% of the Kenya GDP. You're thinking, wow, for a, in quotes, zero cognitive load product, it was doing okay.
Yeah. Had no fancy bells, whistles, didn't require it. You know what? The problem now is, of course, I can't get it unless I have a Kenyan mobile number, which was the thing when I was there, like recently, I was like, oh, that kind of sucks.
Yeah. Like, but there's KYC and there's the AML and they're all the strictures, right?
Sure.
But it's, the same example, a similar example, is Cash App.
Yep.
Right. In the US, right? Genius product.
Yeah.
Or
even WeChat in China.
I guess, zero cognitive load.
Yeah.
Right. And, and what I think people always miss with these, underserved markets, is again, this iceberg philosophy, just how large they are, right? They just, you look at Block's latest quarter and what Cash App is doing in one quarter, you're thinking, and Cash App is really a middle of America phenomenon.
Yep.
Right. I mean, the coast or whatever it is, they're snooty, they use Zelle, they use this, and all that good stuff. But Cash App is a middle of America phenomenon. And it is a giant of a business, right? But again, it's really thinking about these markets. And, you think about it and say, if Cash App woke up today and said, oh, let's go raise money, right? I don't know which VCs will give them money.
Really?
Because it's a market where they'll be like,
it's not sexy.
No. And they're like, do these people have any money?
Yeah.
But they do.
Yeah. And in fact, they have money and they're more conscious about how much money they have and where they're spending it and how they're spending it, right? So they are locked in. They don't have the ability to kind of shop around. Right?
So when you're bringing these products to market, what you're also doing is serving markets and customers that have zero to limited optionality.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when you talk about churn, you don't see a lot of churn in these markets because they don't have very much optionality to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. But
these products also become such an embedded part of their life that there's just no way that
That's it. They become habits.
Yeah. Habits. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so So that's how we think about these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. I'm sure, again, we could talk about that for another hour as well. But look, when you started raising Echo VC, and we talked again a little bit about this on the primer, but you were a black GP trying to raise money.
I still am, by the way.
You are, yeah. I think I double checked when you came in. You still got the right card. You're carrying the credentials, but you're trying to raise money for a crazy strategy like a random strategy, right? That no one had ever heard of, right? You wanted to invest in these weird places in underserved markets, and you know, people hadn't thought about it or even heard about it, I guess, because we're going back to 2014, right? Like, people weren't thinking about this stuff. But what were the specific challenges you think you faced as a person of color trying to raise a fund, and as a person of African origin, right? Like a Nigerian origin, trying to raise capital, and how did you overcome them, right? Because I assume, like, especially in the US, again, you are that many parts removed, right? You're not an African American, you are an African in America, right?
With a weird hybrid accent.
Yeah.
So
I don't want to raise that, but yeah.
But I think you know, when I look back now, you know, where did I find sort of coefficient of drag, right? Where did I find headwinds? One was the strategy didn't match the allocation structure of LPs. So as an LP kindly told me, you want to do Africa and Asia, LPs don't even set up like that. They might have the rest of the world, Asia, Americas, Europe.
Yeah.
Right. But they never have any sort of communication between those groups. So that's a problem. The second is that, you know, they don't necessarily see a track record in these markets, right? So yes, you've done some stuff in in India, and you've done well and all that good stuff, but there's no specific track record in those markets, which I think was a fair pushback on that. And then I think the third was that, you know, I had come close at Intel Capital with big wins, but I was contrarian. And I was right, but I didn't have capital at risk. And that was the biggest loss, right? Because, you know, even when we're fighting for the first Facebook investment and I was begging, you know, I was like, okay, fine, we can't do 260 because the CEO was being weird. The Intel CEO was being weird about it. I still remember walking up and down the corridor trying to beg my boss, okay, can we just do 75, right? And it's kind of interesting because even the 75, right, you know, Facebook got to $1 trillion. You know, you come in at 75, even at 10 billion, you know, it's a real number, right? But, you know, we never got close enough, right? You know, even LinkedIn, when I wanted to do 85 to 125, you know, that was, you know, we came close again, but didn't get it done.
Yeah.
You know, that would have returned 20 plus X.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, there were these giant returns. So while I wasn't, you know, I had a few good things out there, the big returns I didn't have them. So I could talk about them, but, you know, I could never rely on them. Right. So I think out there being, you know, people talk about, well, you can, you know, be contrarian, but a lot of the allocated money is really not designed to take those risks, right? And so, you know, I always described the fundraising part as pouring diesel into an F1 engine, and so, you know, and that's why, you know, we kept plugging away. But, you know, what's also interesting is that, you know, even when you're contrarian and right, you know, you look back and people, you know, I still remember people who said, this strategy is dumb. These markets are never going to amount to anything.
Yeah.
Well, the markets actually did amount to something, actually to a lot, right? And so you're now
and are continuing to grow.
And continue to grow.
I literally spoke to someone yesterday whose entire business is around diligencing African ventures for VC funds sitting outside of Africa because they don't have boots on the ground. Yeah.
And if you look at it, like the really interesting aspect of it is you were there and you're like, yeah, of course, farmers do this. I know farmers. Like, people don't know farmers, not to mention the challenges. And there's a lot of, and this is part of the insight that Kenny brought when he created WeFarm. There was a very paternalistic approach to say, oh, we know how to farm. Let us teach you small-scale farmers in Africa or Latin America or Asia how you should do it. And his insight was they're actually super smart people. They're running, to run a farm is to run a business. And like they're like more experienced, less experienced. If we just provide the platform for them to help each other, like they already do, we just like embed the existing behavior and scale it. And people never met a farmer. Like I was not even talking about in Africa, in UK, or like the amount of people that know farmers, and the entire aspect of farmers helping each other, small scale farmers, was really difficult for people to wrap their hands around. I think if you look at the business itself, one of the biggest challenges is how the hell do you scale to millions of farmers in Africa? And that was 2015. Smartphones were there, but not in Africa. Smartphone penetration in Africa in 2015 was about 14%.
Yeah.
So
now everyone has like 4.
Now it's in Kenya, it's about 55%.
Yeah.
But like I think in Nigeria is about going on 30%, 25%. But again, Nigeria is almost 200 million people, so that's still huge. But it's moving up. And I think one of the biggest challenges was like, oh, we don't see the scale. The only companies that were able to get to millions of small-scale farmers in Africa as a whole were telcos.
Yeah.
Which
is where M-Pesa and all of these sort of things. Yeah.
So I would say the core challenge is how do you keep an engaged small-scale farmer and then scale it in a recurrent manner and figuring out that scale. And it took, I would say, roughly 6 to 12 months to understand what is the mechanism to increasingly grow. But then within, I think, the first year, it was 32,000. The second year, there was more than doubled that, about 80,000. And then it's 1 million.
Wow.
And then it became, within a couple of years, 3.5 million. The only ones that are able, still today, to get to 3.5 million are like telcos.
Yeah.
So once we have that, the second challenge was how do you commercialize and where within the value chain we step in. And I think we investigated a lot of ways. We found the right one, I think. I think one of our challenges is like with many startups is 2022 happened.
Yeah.
And
what just before you get to that, what was the commercial model then?
So the end commercial model there was a marketplace.
Okay.
Where basically, and this is part of the realization, there were 2 things that happened in 2020. I put COVID aside. Within all of that, we realized that smartphone penetration has got to almost 50% in Kenya. So we need to choose if we're building an app or continue on SMS. And we decided to realize, well, all the farmers will be on smartphones and at least half of them are. So let's build to where they are. So we switch platforms. We literally dropped the SMS.
The SMS, yeah.
We kept it running for the ones that won, but didn't put any effort in it. And moved all the resources in developing an app. And within that, basically, think about like any other marketplace. There's retailers that sell to farmers on a daily basis.
Yeah.
We came to those retailers and said, in your county, you have 2,000 people that buy from you per month. We have 10,000 people in your county alone. Put your store online, put all your stock.
And this was this what developed into We Farm Shop?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
And basically, you put all your stuff online. We help you sell more, and we take a percentage out of it.
Yeah.
The idea after that, and we already started running, was now that we have, and there's a whole thing about loans to small-scale farmers. The problem is most loans in Africa are delivered based on acreage. Like, you have 2 acres. Yeah, I can give you like 20,000 Kenyan shillings.
Yeah.
Why? Because you can probably produce this or that, and it's. But there's a huge aspect of gap of basically, you call it in our world basically just running the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, the costs. Yeah.
And once we have somebody that is buying online, we have basically access to a way to estimate disposable income.
Yeah.
So instead of having 30% default rate,
you essentially create credit scoring for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We become the credit scoring. We're already talking to banks, and basically based on if you've done the average spent per purchase, the first one, the average was 10. but people bought 4 times a month and ended up with about 32 on average.
Wow.
$32 per spend, because again, running a business takes money.
Yeah.
And we just shifted all that money to us. And basically within that, take a fee, then become the debt provider and so on. And
Yeah,
so
so you essentially create a financial services app for smallholders.
But there was I would say, 2 reinforcing network effects. The one about the knowledge in the community. People kept coming back because the knowledge. So like people always diversify in terms of what the crops. And somebody said, oh, I want to start farming bees. I was like, oh, this is what you need to do. ABC. This is how you start with it. This is 1, then 3, then 5. Somebody said, oh, but how do you purify honey? This is one of the most memorable posts. I was like, and then somebody gave one step-by-step 14 bullet points. How do you purify honey? And I remember we all looked at it and was like, this is amazing, because if you Google it, there's nothing on it. It's like, but this is super applicable for small-scale farmers, because we're talking about take these 2 type of like containers. They are basically plastic containers. Put 2 rocks in this. This is like super basic but super valuable. And people kept coming back for that. And then they were like, okay, so what type of pesticide do I need to buy? How do I do this? And that is a feedback loop directly into the shop.
Yeah.
Where they buy more.
Yeah, so it's like, now I know how to purify honey. Where do I buy my bucket? Right,
exactly.
Go back to the shop, buy. Yeah.
So buy all the stuff there, and the shop itself is like, okay, you buy more. We can actually give you more credit. We can buy more and basically build your business bigger and better. I'm not even touching the second layer that we wanted to do. Is now that I have all the data of what all the retailers in Kenya have, and it's online, and how they sell, we can help the same thing for them, which is basically provide debt for them and connect them to the marketplace for financing. But also we can help them buy better. So the entire thing was being the digital platform that connects all the players and make it more efficient and more equitable.
You go up and down the value chain, essentially. And
but again, that was
financial
we
services.
haven't touched on that, unfortunately, yet, because 2022 happened.
Yeah, well, sadly, I guess, because, I mean, I think, one of the we're going to have Eghosa on in a couple of weeks, talk about Africa tech in general, but certainly Nigeria, Lagos, and so on. But the thing that I always am struck by is that tech that is serving populations in Africa is serving grassroots populations. These are people with real needs, and therefore the tech is often solving real problems. Like I always say, whilst we're sitting here investing in 15-minute grocery delivery, like these guys are solving.
Now it's about 45.
Yeah, if you're lucky. If there's anyone standing, I'm not sure who's just been acquired, but I think someone else has just died a death as well, right? But these are real problems, and I think it's really sad when propositions like this essentially close down, because they really were solving a direct need of an underserved market, right? Yeah,
definitely. Don't get me wrong. I think one of the challenges that, and people look at it a lot in terms of, we shouldn't, like VCs should invest in innovative solutions and change the world. And as a VC or ex-VC, I think there's a fallacy that people don't understand about what VCs are actually there for.
They're there to make money.
Not just there for other people. They manage other people's money. Yeah. There's obligations to that. And not to invest in cool innovative solutions.
Innovation is like a happy product of investing in the right financial return. Yeah.
And what really matters to most VC, because the structure of the fund requires very fast returns and very big returns.
I mean, we VCs, we always talk about what problem are you solving? And I personally think, to your point, in Africa, people are solving real problems.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get from A to B? There is no, like...
That's the most basic
like,
of problems.
It's so basic. Yeah. How do I get, fundamental education for my child when I can't afford to live close to the school because everything's expensive? I live miles away, but, oh my goodness, there's only one bus. So that's twofold problem, right? Transport problem, education problem. If you have a digital way, as an example,
like Bridge,
to deliver that,
Bridge University,
Bridge Academy,
sorry,
et cetera, et cetera. Now, so why Africa? Problems are huge. population is very young. We've experienced immense growth in tech over the last few years, which is amazing. On the one hand, it's been a huge flow of venture dollars into Africa. I have my opinions on that in terms of whether it's the right money or the wrong money.
I mean, a lot of the chats that I'm on are like, yeah, we're looking at investing in Africa, but we're looking for businesses doing 2 million EBITDA and at like post Series C. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you just basically want zero risk.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which again, and it's ironic because we're in the venture game. Hello, wake up. Yeah. If we're in the venture game, we need to take risk. But the good thing is money's been flowing into the continent, which is great. There've been, unfortunately, some mishaps, but guess what? There have been mishaps everywhere. The interesting thing is the media usually, I would argue, accentuates it when it's in certain markets versus others. But
or certain people, right?
Or
So,
certain
like
people.
the Elizabeth Holmes kind of
Correct,
effect, right?
correct. And then I think the other thing is we've been seeing, so a lot of companies have been raising follow-on rounds, which is good. A lot of companies have exited, which is amazing. Those founders who have exited are now channeling money back into the ecosystem, talking about network effects and the flywheel again, which is obviously spurring the new set of companies and innovators, which is amazing.
Which is what's missing in the UK, to be quite blunt. Right?
Fair enough. And then the other piece is around the funds. So what started as angel syndicates are now graduating to micro funds. Micro funds are now raising their fund twos. So basically emerging fund managers who've been long on the continent for a while are actually growing up, if you like. Again, it's super early. I mean, the largest fund in the whole of Africa is Partech, Partech's Africa Fund, 235 million, which
That's
I mean, it's
big but
for
it's
Africa.
Not, yeah.
But it's not big. I mean, if you compare that to Europe, it's like, oh, okay, you're a seed fund.
Yeah.
whereas for Partech, that's like literally, it's more like a growth fund, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I have a lot of time for Africa. Obviously, I'm Nigerian myself, passionate about the region. I'm long on the region, and I will continue to invest there.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, like you, I'm Kenyan, although that gets debated by people all the time. I was born there, and would consider myself, and my family certainly considers themselves East African Indians. And I think we see it all the time, right? There are businesses that are being built out there that really are truly innovative, are really, breaking ground on something that is affecting people, on the ground. We interviewed Eghosa Omoigui on the podcast a few episodes ago, and we talked very specifically about one company where and I think this is the challenge with Africa, especially for people either coming in as investors or people coming in and trying to build in Africa. And the way he described it is like, if you do not have a fundamentally lived experience of the problems on the ground, you cannot build to solve those problems
100%.
Because those problems are so unique and are so visceral, right? Like to people, if you haven't actually been through those, if you haven't actually,
You can't understand it.
You can't understand it, and if you can't understand it, you can't build to solve.
Correct.
So I think for anyone that is interested in the Africa scene, I think obviously follow Toyosi, but and others, but there are some really exciting things happening there.
One more point on that, just before we move on, and I said it, but I didn't say it explicitly. Talent.
Yeah.
If we genuinely believe that talent is evenly distributed in the world, then we should be looking at Africa. In any case, a bunch of people who went to study in Europe, went to study in the US, they've now moved back and they're now trying to build companies that can affect the people. And it's a nice segue, actually, and to Ascension with our funds, because one thing that I can definitely say about Ascension that I've seen is culturally, everyone genuinely believes that talent is evenly distributed, and that is shown in the, sorry to use the word, but the diversity of the founders that we actually have in the company.
In the company and in the fund.
In the company and in the fund.
Yeah.
Correct.
So interestingly, my sister-in-law, so my cousin's wife, who is African, grew up in Kenya, is now working for a business that's actually based out of Australia. She lives in Australia. That is essentially running apprenticeships for developers out of Africa, and are finding, and what that means is going to US, UK, and other presumably European or certainly English-speaking kind of countries, and placing these developers 3 months free of charge to the business. Thereafter, they kind of have to hire them. What they're finding is actually the quality of the talent is so great that it's a no-brainer, right? And actually, yes, slightly cheaper. I think market forces will play an effect there, and people start developing. But I think that is a massive. There is, to your point, a massive opportunity, because there is talent on the continent. There are other companies that I've seen. Again, I can't remember. I think it was Hyperion Development in South Africa again, which had this really interesting, and again, network effects, right? So it would train developers and then use the developers to train the developers,
the next developer,
and essentially
Very
create
nice.
a flywheel in that way. But yeah, look, I mean, I think again we could talk about Africa
could
for a
talk
long
about this
time.
all day, indeed.
So moving on, right, and kind of. I guess associated with this whole conversation is, we've all heard by now, at least I hope we have, that only 1.87, so sub 2% of venture funding goes to women and minority ethnic or minority led startups. It is still worth repeating that and banging that drum, till the cows come home, because something needs to change. But what about the other side of the table, right? So what is the culture like in VC? As a minority, as a member of an underrepresented community, and what was your lived experience of that?
That's a very interesting question, very personal as well. So I was very fortunate to get into VC, and actually, I mean, most people don't think this probably, but I think anyone who works in venture is fortunate. Period.
Sure. Because
you're basically deciding whether or not you're going to put money into somebody else's company that is dependent on you in a way, and you're choosing. You're choosing,
and you're deferring the results from that choice for like 10, 15 years.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So that's a very privileged position to be in. So my experience, to be honest, when I think about how I even got into venture, so I post founding the company, went to business school for a bit, started working at Creative Fund. Then I had an internship at Bessemer, and then I got introduced.
Oh, sorry, Creative Fund, not Creandum, as I mentioned earlier. Okay.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Apologies.
No problem. Worked at Creative Fund, did an extended internship at Bessemer, and then I eventually got introduced to Speed Invest by a mutual contact from Creative Fund. And I focus on that point because when I think back, I think all of my venture gigs were through an introduction.
It's massively relationship driven, yeah.
It's massively relationship driven, which shouldn't be, right? I mean,
it's a warm intro.
So actually,
problem.
So on this point, and people feel two ways about this. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I think it's unfair that it's that way. But on the other hand, if you go away from venture for a second and you just think about everything in life, you make decisions oftentimes off the basis of trust. But trust usually comes from people you know. And so it's not just a venture thing.
People you know and people that look like you.
That is true.
Right.
Actually, and that's the point.
And this is it's the issue with recruitment. It's been proven time and time again. Like, people will often recruit people that look like them.
Yes.
Right. And to take it a step further, if you think about venture from the perspective of a founder, if you're an underrepresented founder, like, do you want to talk to the 40-year-old white male who doesn't have, who hasn't lived that experience that you've lived, or, hasn't understood what it means to be, a farmer in the DRC or whatever? Or would you rather speak to someone who has lived on the continent, is African by heritage, has understood exactly where you're coming from, and like could regale you with stories of the same thing?
100%.
Right? Yeah.
100%. So I'm going to say 2 points. So I'll first answer the question because I realize I haven't actually answered
That's
it.
fine. Sorry, that's my fault.
No worries at all. So my experience as a VC being underrepresented in venture, and I use the term underrepresented intentionally. as opposed to ethnic minority. And I'll tell you why. I said this to someone literally just 2 days ago. I'm Nigerian. There are 250 million of us in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not a minority.
Yeah, yeah. It's why I hate BAME as a phrase. Like, I mean, like, BAME captures more than half of the world's population.
Exactly.